really things have been a little crazy for Team Orthodoxy members of late. We've had a lot of different situations coming up. I mean, there's the various deaths happening in the life of Chris and Julie. There's been all the on a much lesser note, obviously comparatively, a lot of chaos in the preparation for the talks. As Jennifer talked about, she lost her talk twice, and Chris and Julie's Chris's mom was unable to work on the talk because of the funeral preparations, and I had coming off of exams and trying to prep for the catechism videos and everything. And it was just I was just noticing there's just been a lot of stuff happening overall. Sadly, I don't know quite as much with Brooke and Mike what's been going on in their lives. We should have more conversations. We really should. But really overall, what I've just been kind of noticing that there's been a lot of difficulties and a lot of kind of chaos and stuff. And with Christmas coming up, I know that's another thing that very frequently happens, is all the preparations and to-do of trying to get Christmas ready. Worldwide, even looking at the deaths of all those children, the gunner who shot them down in Connecticut. It's in Connecticut, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's been a lot of stuff going on, and
with the apocalypse happening in February.
Yeah, that's we got 2 days on the end of the world, So it gives us a lot to think about, But really, it's I think that what can happen with all of this stuff going on is we can get lost in all of the preparation, we can get lost in the chaos, we can get lost in, trying to deal with all of these different things, and more easily lose the sense of what it is that God is saying to us and where He's trying to lead us. And we can get lost in the anxiety and the helplessness of it all, and just become exhausted with it. So I was thinking, what is really the solution to this problem? What do we do about how are we to understand what all of this stuff that's going on, what's happening? And I thought, in light of this talk, I was looking to Mary, obviously, and thinking about her virtues and what she has done. And what stood out to me was that Mary, whenever things, throughout her entire life, but ultimately whenever things are at their worst, Mary always has this listening heart. And so that's sort of the angle I want to talk about on the virtues of Mary, is this listening heart of Mary. I know it's not an official virtue out there. It might fit in the realm of prayer, and I think it kind of incorporates a number of them. But in a lot of ways, I think it's sort of the way in which a virtue prepares us in our hearts to then go out into action. It seems to me to be what virtue really does, is it prepares us interiorly so that, the virtue becomes a continuous outpouring in what we do. So, Mary always had a certain quietness in her heart. She was always prayerfully considering what it is that God was speaking to her in her life. I went through St. Alphonsus of Liguori's The Glories of Mary, which is a very interesting book, and it was funny because I picked it up and realized, hey, look, it's got the virtues of Mary in there. But that's when I realized that as I was praying through it, this is what kind of led me to this whole listening heart of Mary, as I was saying. And I think that what this all speaks of to us, I think that there's a message in this for specifically us as Team Orthodoxy, that God, I think, is asking us to have that listening heart, to have our ears being attentive to hearing His word and listening and asking ourselves, what is it that He is saying to us right now? Where is He leading us? What is He doing? And I think it'll become a little more apparent as I continue on here. So first of all, what is this listening heart? What do I mean by that? First of all, I think it's about always listening and considering how God is speaking to the soul. So it's a sort of it's a posture of attentiveness. That's the first thing. So a listening heart has a posture of attentiveness, of always being ready and listening, so that we're actually focused and paying attention and not getting distracted.
So
and
like Mike's sitting right now.
yeah, that posture of attentiveness. Very good, Mike. And the reason I think this is something to really keep in mind, because I think it's very easy for us, since we're focused on social media. There's something about social media that can easily pull away our attention. It's sort of the nature of having, especially being connected to everything, that we can easily, and I've seen this happen sometimes, and I've done it myself, where we've just picked up our mobile device or whatever, and we're hanging out, we're spending time together, and then all of a sudden we just all heads down. I'm evangelizing, I'm doing things, and that's good and it's important. I think we need, obviously this is what we're doing, but I think we need to be careful and watchful that we're not, it's not pulling us away from each other, and that it's not pulling us away from God, but that we're using it for His glory. And so if we look at the example of Mary, we look at, for example, the story when at the Nativity, when Mary is sitting there, with Jesus in the manger, and all of a sudden, all these people start showing up. Let me just picture this for a moment, do a little Lectio Divina. As we're sitting there imagining ourselves sitting there, baby just got born, really kind of problematic scenario. The first thing that happens is a whole mess of problems. There's, first of all, there's no room at the inn. You're just, they're bringing in their child, and Jesus is about to be born, and all of a sudden they can't find a place for him to stay, and they end up having to go to a stable and having to put Jesus in a manger, in a feeding trough. So this is not really the ideal of situations in which to begin. And so there's all these problems happening. And then second of all, there's a lot of peculiar events that are happening. So you have all of a sudden, here comes, these shepherds all of a sudden show up, and these magi show up. All these people, I just gotta wonder, how they felt. They're sitting there with baby Jesus, and all of a sudden all these people just start showing up, and you're like, hi? Can we help you? And I imagine there was some confusion of what was going on. And they start talking to her about how it is that they were led there. They're telling their stories and saying how, these angels appeared. The shepherds are saying these angels appeared to us, and they're singing glory in the highest, and they told us to come to Bethlehem, and we came here. And the magi are saying, we knew that there was this, king who was to come, and we followed this star, and the star led us here, and we brought all these gifts for him, and there's this, this is a lot of weird stuff that's going on. So when there's a lot of things that are happening which are out of the ordinary, or big problems and chaos and all these things kind of going on, we look at what Mary did. Is right after it says all of these things happened to her, it says she pondered all of these things in her heart. Like Jen happened to mention before. That, Mary takes all of this in. She just absorbs it, ponders it, goes over it, considers it. So she's already got this posture of attentiveness that in the middle of the chaos, in the middle of the craziness, she's already listening and going, okay, this is a lot of weird, this has been an odd day. Things have not gone right.
This is not normal how birth happens.
Exactly. This isn't really usual. So what's going on here? And she's not necessarily making any conclusions yet, but she's just absorbing it, letting it take hold of her. And she's considering the signs of what are happening. Then we see also at the Annunciation, obviously we've all heard a lot about Mary's response, about her fiat. We all know that Mary giving her yes, and that importance and the virtue of her obedience there. But what was it that led to this response? And this was something I hadn't really thought about before. Mike's got this crazy smirk on his face. I was wondering what's going on in your head.
A pondering in face.
Okay.
Pondering in my heart.
Awesome. Good stuff, man.
You know how we look angry when we think? He looks really happy.
So, anyways, I just wondered, what is it about this, that brought about this whole response of Mary? Because there's obviously stuff leading up to this. Mary didn't just suddenly have an angel appear to her and give her this really weird greeting of saying, hail full of grace, which is I wrote it down here somewhere. I'll come back to it later, what the word in Greek is and stuff. But she, having this really bizarre meeting with a angel, showing up in front of her and telling her, you're going to have the Son of God, how's that sound? She analyzes the situation. She asks a question. She says, well, okay, I'm a virgin, so how is this, how is this going to work out? Because, clearly if I'm supposed to have a child and I'm a virgin, what are we doing here? So she sorts out the details, finds out what's supposed to happen, and she responds well with her fiat. But what leads to this, I believe, is a long posture of attentiveness, of having lived a continuous life of prayer. Sorry, I want to make sure I'm not doing this out of order, because a lot of this kind of connects. So I'll come back to that. The other thing is that a listening heart really carries things with you. So what needs to happen is that, as Mary ponders these things in her heart, it's not that she simply jumps right into action and just goes straight into responding, but rather we see time and again all these verses where it says Mary pondered all these things in her heart. She carried these things with her in her heart. We can be tempted sometimes when things are tough or difficult, or we simply don't understand them. We can easily kind of just get busy and forget it, try and drown out the problem by activity, by doing a lot of stuff, or perhaps by simply ignoring it and trying not to wrestle with the issue because we're worried where it may take us, worried the results of what thinking about it might produce, and we're afraid of that. Or perhaps it might just be too difficult, and we just don't want to struggle with it. And so it's really important, I think, to place these things in God's hands like Mary does, to listen, to just really, and to have that listening heart which then absorbs everything that's going on and sit with it and just let it resonate and let it affect who you are and just become a part of you. And even if it doesn't make sense at first, to just allow that to be in our hearts. And that's what I see that Mary does. Which leads to the next thing, that a listening heart leads to a response. Once you have taken these things in and pondered them over and allowed it to shape you, just like at the Annunciation, Mary had the fact that Mary's called full of grace. I should have mentioned this before, but the fact that Mary's called full of grace says something. The word itself. I'm gonna look. I know I have it written here somewhere. Kakaritomine. Kakaritomine. That's how it's pronounced, as far as I could tell. This is what when the angel says to her, "Hail, full of grace." It's that word. It's a Greek word, kakaritomine, which means full of grace, and there's an implication in it because it's a past participle of the word. It means not only is she full of grace in the past, but she also it means that throughout all the past she's been full of grace. So it's not just now, but it's also back then. So it's this continued lived out experience. So we see that Mary has it's not that she just begun, but her entire life has been lived with this listening heart, with this posture of attentiveness to the Lord. And so that's how it bears fruit. So when she comes to the response, obviously, I think this is kind of clear, that we don't just sit with things, but eventually we have to respond. That's the whole purpose, because it calls us to obedience. And, and that's why we see that Mary reacts the way that she reacts. It's really ultimately remarkable that she took everything so well. With all of these different situations that happen, she always just very calmly kind of goes, "Okay, all right. So what does the Lord want from me? Okay, all right, I'll do that." Very simple, very straightforward. She just comes to an understanding, lets it happen, and then responds immediately to the Lord. And she has that yes. I think I've covered all that. The next thing is that... The next thing is that the listening heart transforms us in and of itself. And I think this is an important point, because it's not only that, obviously we need to listen. Obviously we need to be attentive so that we may respond to the Lord more faithfully. But it's actually something that way of being, and this is like the nature of virtue and how it works, is that it actually transforms us. The activity of doing that in our heart has a transformative effect on our whole entire lives. And that's why, looking at what did Mary do, she through her entire life was living in this kind of a way of having this real attentiveness to the Lord. And the fruit of this posture is that it formed her to be always immediately responsive to God, so that she was ready, because it's not something you can prepare for last second. If God, I wonder sometimes if God all of a sudden called on me right now to do something crazy, in my estimation, crazy, where I was really not suspecting it, and it was something rather huge,
Like have a baby.
Yeah, like have a baby. As what? That makes even less sense. But if something were to happen, I wonder how I would respond. I might respond more like Zechariah, when he responds in a way of, he almost wants to get more of that sense of the supernatural. The angel appears to him, and he likes this idea, and he's like, okay, well, now I want proof. That's what I want. I want you to prove to me that this is God doing stuff, that this is God speaking to me, and I want a sign. And I want, he wants all this grandiose thing. And there was obviously an intention of his heart, which the Lord knew, that he was desiring something for selfish gain. And so that interior, there's nothing wrong with asking God for clarification. I mean, Mary asked for God for clarification as well. But there was something in what he said that there was a selfish desire that was underlying it, which is why he was silenced and Mary was not. Because in the end, you look at the end of the scene when Zechariah finishes his meeting with the angel, he says nothing. At the end of the meeting with the angel with Mary, she goes out to Veronica. That's not Veronica. I'm sorry. To Elizabeth. I'm thinking of the crucifixion right now. Anyway, so she goes out immediately to Elizabeth. So she leads immediately into action. She first gives this proclamation, "May it be done unto me according to thy word." She speaks, she proclaims her affirmation, yes, and then she goes out into action and she moves. So she has this immediate sense of knowing what it is that God wants her to do and responds to it right away. And that's because she has been transformed through her life, through her prayer, to be able to respond to God. So that's something that we always need to quietly in our hearts always be carefully attentive to, of pausing from everything else, all the chaos. I mean, I think that's why, we're here on retreat. But I think that there's something for us to think about in the way that we've even led this retreat thus far. Not to criticize everyone, but what I've realized has kind of happened is we've done a lot of hanging out. We've done a lot of fun and, just kind of messing in between, but we haven't had as much, I've found, of a posture of prayer, of really pausing from the world, pausing from worldliness. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated because we're also supposed to be doing social media. And I think it's something we need to pray about. I think that's sort of what God is saying, is that we as a team need to stop and to pray and say, how can we do these two things in a way that is glorifying the Lord and allowing us to always be have a heart that is a listening heart of attentiveness and readiness to God, that's willing to pause, step out from all of the worldly things, and yet to use the worldly things to try and evangelize and reach others. So it's as I think about it, it's a very peculiar dynamic that we're trying to meet. And so because it's something so unique, I think it's something that bears a lot of prayer on our part. So to just continue with this, the way in which a listening heart transforms us on the inside, so looking at that, if we look at the way that Mary responded whenever these problems and these confusing situations came up, she responded just so faithfully and perfectly. And I think it's in those situations that are the worst, where things like basically when it hits the fan, when we are in the wine press, being crushed, being pressed to our extreme, when we are stressed to our utmost, when things become the most problematic and the most chaotic, when we just don't understand what to do about anything, no idea what's going on, that it's at those times that we see in almost a very raw way who it is that we are. And it shows not the way that we are when we choose and decide, but it speaks something about how have we become through virtue. And that's what I mean by how a listening heart transforms us over life, because you can, if I have time to be cool and calm and think about something, about a decision, I might come to the same conclusion whether I've been leading a life of very deep, devout prayer, or, maybe just a little lighter prayer life, but I haven't, gone as deep. I might come to some similar decisions. But when things get tough, and I get more strained, the less prayer Steve, the less listening heart Steve, is going to crumble and crush underneath that weight and not be able to handle it. Whereas the listening heart Steve is going to just simply respond faithfully, because there's something that has transformed us in that kind of a way of life that has made us already ready, so that when things become their worst, we know exactly how to respond, and it comes naturally. It's not something that we don't have to choose as difficultly. And that's what virtue does. Virtue is a continued lived life and posture of this listening heart. And so, we see, just as an example, when Mary is in the most impossible of situations, when her son is being carried away to be crucified on a cross, to die, to be shamed, to be mocked, You know, her only son is up there on the cross suffering. Her response was not one of Judas's betrayal. Her response was not Peter's denial because he was afraid for his own life. Her response is not Simon's unwillingness to help to carry the cross, not wanting to get too close. It was not the disgust of the crowd and the persecution. It was not even that of the wailing women, which we might expect from the mother, no less. And it was not that of the unbelieving criminal on the cross who doubted. And these are all the kind of responses that we typically have when we go through the worst. Whereas Mary's response is one of silence as she sits at the foot of the cross, knows exactly where she needs to be, affirms her son in what he has to do, loving him and being there for him. And it's in this moment, in this worst of moments that could have ever gone through the life of Mary, in this moment that she receives the greatest vocation she had in her life. Or, I suppose the second greatest, to being Mother of God. But that she could be the mother of all the world. Because it's there at the cross that the Lord calls her to be our mother. Here is your mother. Here is your son. So I think that as we prepare for Christmas, and we get ourselves ready, and all the things that have been going on, it's been very busy. Not sure if it is for everyone, but I know it can easily be that way, that we need to pause, really make sure that we take the time to pause and reclaim this posture of attentiveness, this listening heart, so that we can carry with us in our hearts continuously everything that's happening and carry Christ in our hearts. And for the purpose that we may then properly respond and that we may be transformed over time by this listening heart. For it's often in the craziest and the worst of times that God gives us our greatest role. And so we never know when things are at their worst and they're the most confusing. It could be right at those very moments that God is trying to speak to us and tell us that He's calling us to do something greater. And so we need to really listen for that mission to what He is calling us to do.